getting frozen.
Yeah, I got a
Box.
2.5 frozen ones. Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
Or just with almond yogurt or something. Yeah, nice.
We're surprised to see your watermelons are not grown like
They are in August,
yeah,
but not yet.
Just seasonal.
Not yet.
Yeah.
All the melons come in August.
Does your growing season extend out to sort of like October?
Yeah.
Is that the way it is?
Apples go all the way to November,
Okay.
but September is like peak harvest here.
Okay. So that's like a harvest celebration
Yeah.
type time.
Yeah, this is this venue. The busiest months of the year are September, October.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tommy thought it might be related to the harvest and
Probably.
celebrate.
Yeah.
Weddings.
And the changing. I thought it was the brides wanted to be in front of the colours.
Change in October.
Yeah.
Lots of people from the city come and get their pumpkins as well.
Oh, I do that.
Halloween and Thanksgiving.
And do you have big pumpkin celebrations? Your pumpkins are like
Some of that, there's contests, and winners are like.
how big you can grow a pumpkin.
Yeah.
That's right. Last year we were here.
Sail in it, that's perfect.
They have the pumpkin regatta where they actually ride.
They ride the pumpkins. In the water. How big are these pumpkins?
They carve them out like a
They're really
boat.
tricky because they're around you and never know where the boundaries are.
And what about quite a.
Oh, it's very sketchy.
Yeah.
And you can't use an old Halloween one because it already has the things cut out. So you just
Yeah.
You often say a whole heap of things, and we don't use that expression that, you know. that
A whole
we
heap
want.
of things.
Yeah, so we were in a store on the way here and we bought a heap of popcorn right on the.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mary, are you thinking of coming back here next year
Yeah.
at this location?
not this venue. Probably.
Maybe not this venue, but.
The drawback of this venue is that we can't eat indoors.
Yeah, it's a problem. Particularly because next time we're thinking coming for 12 days.
Yeah, and next
Doing
year
it a long event where
want
we
to
do
do
6 or. Well,
6 days.
We're planning 6 days public stuff and then 2 days interview stuff. So, and they do have this venue free on the exact. We'll talk about that tomorrow in the afternoon. We'll talk about when we've already planned the dates and everything. But we're now looking at venues tomorrow. On Monday, we'll be looking at some venues starting Monday, and then we're doing a bit of a drive around, have a look at some others.
But we like this area, and next year we want to offer a bit of a different program where, if any of you've looked at the God's Way displays back there, something we do every week in God's Way is something called a Humility in Practice Day, and that's where you come and do something meaningful and productive and of assistance to others or the environment, and you have a chance to practice what you learn in a seminar in a real life situation. So we want to offer 2 of those days next year everywhere we go.
So it's sort of like a week-long program is what we're thinking, but with some days break, 1 or 2 days break in between, so you don't get exhausted. But that's the idea. But we also need to be aware that with the Humility in Practice days, that if we come along, because it will be work boots and stuff like that, you come along to a venue like this and they're probably not going to let you in. But,
Like if it rains or something, we want the flexibility to be able to come indoors. Same with your lunch. Like if it rained today, it would be quite tricky eating lunch outside. So we need something with a little bit more flexibility on the.
That being said, we may be forced into this because it is available, but we'll see what else is available. We're looking at Acadia here on Monday, so we think given the amount of space they have, we might be able to get something there.
That's the university in Wolfville. So hopefully.
Yeah, so that's our plans. We'll talk more about our plans tomorrow in the afternoon.
All right, I think everyone's here.
Yeah. Now, do you want to mention, is there anything we have? Oh, there's a few things people would like to thank for.
I'll do that tomorrow. But yeah, we can do it.
Yeah, let's do it today now before we get started. And the main reason why we could come back this year is one person donated the funds for us to do our entire trip. So that person's name is David, so we'd like to thank David for us. that's meant that, so you fundamentally paid for our entire trip. So your donations that we receive from you this week or whatever will go towards next year's trip. Yeah.
We'd also locally like to thank Adrian, who's given us lots of help in researching venues. She did a lot of research
already.
And Lisa actually found this venue as well. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
And Adrian's had the trauma of me delivering a lot of gear to her.
A whiteboard,
All sorts of things.
400 books.
We bought this whiteboard and so forth, it's got a centre and things like that. And
These chairs.
And
So a lot of equipment has come to Adrian's basement.
yeah. We find that it was easier to buy it than hire it, unfortunately, so we finished up buying it. But and there's also been cables and all sorts of video cables and other things that we've sent to her as well. And in one, if you go into her basement, it was full of books as well and other things like that. So yeah, thanks for that. Thank you. Yeah. Having somewhere to store it is great because obviously otherwise we'd have to buy some kind of storage unit or something and then pay for that for the next year, for the whole year. Yeah. So that's good. There was also, as we mentioned yesterday, the Church of the New Birth who gave us the facility of being able to buy from them the books at cost price, because that was pretty important for us because normal prices would have been 3 or 4 times as much. And that has meant that something that because we bought, all told, including Australia, we've probably bought 2,500 volumes or something like that to distribute for free. But that would have meant, so there's like 10,000 books. And if we were paying $15 a book, which we ended up paying US versus $45 a book, you can see it would have been a significant amount of funds gone on the books. So it's good that they've done that for us. And if any of you think about it, just to maybe shoot them a donation or something to help them out, because they have had some problems with their Amazon printing, and Amazon is not refunding them for bad printing either. So that meant they did actually lose some funds, even though we paid for all the books. They finished up losing some funds because they refunded us some funds for some of the books, but they didn't get a refund themselves. Yeah, so they thought they would, but they didn't. And so, we'd like to support them in that regard.
Who do we give the money to? If they took their
We will let you know tomorrow, maybe,
Yeah.
where you can donate things for. We're not sure. We've had to do it. We've had to make a special arrangement with our payments with them.
We have given them some donations. as
Yeah,
well,
and we've
so-
given them some donations too, but
But we can set up a box if you'd like. Yeah.
something that will. Well, I'm not sure whether they have a method of receiving donations.
I really don't.
We'll have to check with them. So
I'll
we'll
have
do
to
that
have a
today
chat.
sometime,
Yeah.
or tonight, and try to work out how they can receive some. Yeah.
There's also, I wanted to thank Sarah and Tommy for the loan of their van.
Yeah, thank you.
That's been a massive.
That's so good.
I love that van. I call it the mighty van. Gets everything done.
Carries a lot, which
Yeah.
is what we need now. So it's good. All right, so, and also yesterday the donations, we received some donations which half covered the hall already, the
So
whole
thank you
price,
for
so
those.
thanks for that. What we want to do today is, as we said yesterday, focus a little bit more on the principles associated with working through issues relating to sin. Now, before we talk about it, I would like to talk about the fundamental principles involved in removing sin from yourself, which is one of the most powerful things you can do for your entire life. Now,
I've got some readings.
yeah,
I might read that
we,
one. You just-
if we could just write it down for you to read some Paget messages, maybe, as well as Mary. wants to read a quote of me saying some things last year. in
Well,
Ireland.
really on that topic of why dealing with your sin is the most important thing.
Yeah. So what we'd like you to do is on page 235 of your first book, there's a discussion, I think it's from myself,
Yeah.
about sin.
Did you read from it?
So page 235, I didn't read it yesterday, it's a different one I read it 127 years ago. So it's a fairly long message, I think, that message, 235, I think it's quite a few pages. But it talks about the relationship between truth and error, and the relationship of what happens between truth and error, there being a fight between truth and error. And so in amongst all of that, there's also an indication of what sin is and things like that. So we'd recommend for you to read that tonight. Sound all right? Yeah. To read that message. You'll find in the Paget messages, the celestial spirits who helped us bring them to earth, we're all pretty clever. We know what's going down, and particularly in the spirit world. Everybody involved, who are celestial spirits involved in particular with those messages, know what the primary problems of earth are and why we face the problems we face. And it fundamentally does get down to the fact that love, human love, is not sufficient to solve our problems. And the main reason why human love is not sufficient to solve the problems is because human love is fickle. Sometimes you love one person and then you move on to the next person and then you forget the other person. These are the kinds of things that happen with human love. Human love is a very fickle form of love. God's love is not fickle. God's love is stable, secure, strong, and remains. And for that reason, it's more permanent. So anything, when you receive God's love, there's a permanent change to your soul that occurs, but there's also permanent changes to your life that occur. And all to your own benefit, as well as to the benefit of others, because you love them more. So it's very important to see that that human love itself has its problems. So if you're going to rely on human love to make a better world, it's not going to happen very rapidly at all, right? Now, there are some Paget messages that talk about that principle, that human love is not sufficient to actually solve human problems. And this is why we need God in our life, and God's love, to help change our perspective of what love is. The problem with human love is that for the large majority of it is actually not love as God sees it, but rather it's addictions. Love doesn't equal addictions. But for many of us, we feel when a person meets our addictions, they love us. And that is one of the fundamental problems with human love. From God's perspective, addictions are actually sins. And in fact, for the large part of our problems on earth are actually the sins related to our addictions. In other words, we want something, we feel we need something from others, we feel we want something, we're missing something, and then what happens is we create a set of addictions to get those things. Right? And they can be anything from beliefs, where you have a belief system that is addictive because it helps you avoid a whole heap of feelings, right the way through to your emotions. It can include sexual behaviour and also your physical life. But fundamentally, all of these addictions are sins. They are opposite to what God's love would do. So God's love, and love from God's perspective, even human love, doesn't equal your addictions. Your addictions are sins. From God's perspective, sins are based on error. So you could also say error is the cause of our sins. In other words, our beliefs that are in error, and they are not equal to truth. A lot of times we think they're true, our beliefs, but they are not. So what happens is God's version of love is not equal to your addictions, but your addictions create your sins. But also the reason why that happens is because truth is not equal to error, obviously, and error inside of us, the belief systems, the error in our emotions in particular, and our beliefs drive our sins. Right? So what you're really looking at in terms of dealing with your sins is there's really two aspects of it. There's firstly coming to have a different understanding of what love is, and coming to have a different understanding of what truth is, what you believe to be true. Those two steps are required. So we need to learn how to change our concepts of love now, and also our concepts of truth. Now, both of those things are stored in our belief systems emotionally. They're not intellectual. You can't change your emotional state thinking that you can change your intellect about just accepting a truth and change your intellect about what you believe love to be. It doesn't work that way. The way God designed you is your soul, your true soul feelings are all based upon your emotional state and not upon your intellect. So one of the biggest problems most people have listening to God's truth is they struggle because they're hearing all of the words with their intellect, and frequently we try to do things in our intellect, but as a result of doing things in our intellect, we are skipping over the emotions that drive the actual beliefs we have and the emotions that drive the actual addictions we have. And we're skipping over all of that. And we often try to change ourselves by changing what we think about, but the trouble with doing that is that you're skipping over the fact that the emotions are not changing. And unless the emotions change, your fundamental beliefs will not change. Right? And this is why religions have come up with these ideas. Right? So the Christian faith has come up with the idea, just be a moral person. And then they've written laws, some of which have been created by people interpretation of the Bible, and others of which have come directly from the Bible. And they've written some laws and they said, do that and you won't sin. Not understanding that actually your emotions are the sins. Right? So you can, if you don't change your emotions, even if you try hard to not sin, you will be sinning because the emotions haven't changed. Right? And fundamentally, the people who do this enter these states that are quite confusing because they're trying hard to live a rigid life where they rigidly adhering to a fundamental set of principles that they believe to be true, while at the same time their emotions are saying, I don't want to live that life. Right? And so because of this now disagreement between the soul and the mind, now you've got to handle it. What do you do in your mind versus what do you do in your soul? And you've got to start handling all of that. And this is what many people who listen to Divine Truth end up doing. They start doing the same thing a Christian would do. Right? Which is not God's way. God's way is to actually change your feelings, your emotions about things. And they have to substantially be completely changed in order for your changes that you make in your life to be natural. Like, you will not be able to automatically love someone without your changes occurring emotionally, where you remove your addictions so that you can automatically love them, where it's not hard for you to love them, where you're not struggling to love them. Now, it's a well-conceived principle on earth that if you're in a partnership, a marriage or a partnership, it's hard sometimes. Right? Hard to love each other sometimes because things get a bit tricky. That's the general concept. And so there's a principle that people say, psychologists and others, and also the average person who teaches these things says, you've got to work at your marriage. That's what they say. If the principle's in your heart, you don't have to work at anything. Your marriage is not one of the things you have to work at. When you love, and you really love, and all of the tendencies you have towards addictions are removed, it is simple to love your partner. It's really easy. Even if they don't love you, it's easy. Right? So the whole concept that we're going to try hard intellectually to impose a set of concepts and beliefs that we now believe to be true, principles that we believe to be true upon ourselves by skipping over the reality of our emotional condition, it's flawed. And every religious faith on earth who does it, and every person who does it in terms of psychological help who do it, ends up flawed, more flawed, because you end up trying to do something that your emotions is screaming at you to not do. Right? So we need to get down to what is the fundamental cause of a problem rather than the effects of it. So you could say, if we just rub this out and say, our sins are the effects. So the sin is the effect of what we do. Well, another way of saying it is that really the effects, which are all the things, our behaviour, what we choose to say, what we choose to think about, what we choose to do, so our behaviour, how we live our life, our fundamental ideas and concepts that we think in our mind are our concepts. These are all effects of something else. And so what we need to do is come to understand that the sins are caused by something. So the behaviour is caused by what? When I yell at somebody because I'm angry, what's that caused by? When I feel condescending towards a person, what's that caused by? When I feel, like I want to deny something and deny some reality, what's that caused by? What drives me to do these things? Why do I want to deny truth? What's that caused by? You can see, if I just focus on the effects of I deny truth, I've got to fix that, and I try to fix that, and I don't know what it's caused by, fundamentally I'm really not going to fix the effect. Now these are fundamental spiritual laws that exist in the universe. The law of cause and effect is a major fundamental law. In fact, in the pageant messages, there are a series of pageant messages we talk about cause and effect, and we talk about the whole concept that if you're trying to change something but it's not the cause, then of course fundamentally it can't change. Right? So what's the cause of war? It's not countries. It's not what most people believe it to be. Right? Fundamentally, the cause of war begins in a family, but most people don't understand that. They feel the cause of war has to do with political powers fighting each other. But fundamentally, it comes from things like ambition, which are created in families. It comes to things like disagreement and how you handle the disagreement. That is established in families. And often whole nations have the same injury with regard to how those things are handled. And so naturally, the nation will go to a war with another nation who has a similar injury in order to get a resolution. But a lot of these problems exist in the individual first. So God is not really going to change things like wars, because God knows that all of the changes that need to happen inside the individual. And only the individual, because you have free will, can change the individual.
I'm going to alter your diagram if I can.
And this should be over there. But how else did you want to alter it?
So, just based on what you're saying
Yeah.
and what we know. So we've got the cause and effect. And then actually, the sin is the cause. So the things that Jesus is talking about in terms of the beliefs that exist within a family, the emotions that we take
Oh,
on.
let's write that down.
And then we call, so beliefs, emotions, attitudes in error. And then the effect is actually the sinful action, isn't it?
Correct.
The sin, so that's the war, for example.
Yeah.
Or arguments.
Now you need to be here so people can
Yes.
see what you're writing.
Yes. There we go. We have to figure out how to do this in the dance, don't we? So just based on, just because I know you would correct that later.
Yeah.
Basically, the cause is the sin that's already within us. And then often on earth, what we call the sin is really the effect. So we say, oh, these wars are happening. Someone got abused. Somebody hit their partner. This was the sin. But actually, that's the sinful action, yes. But it has a deeper cause, which is what Jesus is referring to in his explanation. And these are all the things that drive us in our soul condition, which you'll read about a lot in the Paget messages.
Yeah.
So our beliefs, our emotions, our attitudes, our
Desires,
our
passions.
desires.
We call them sometimes in the Paget messages the appetites. You know.
Which is very fitting, isn't it? Because it feels like a hunger sometimes, those sins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any questions so far about that? So I'm going to go further and develop this a bit further. So, oh, have we got any marks?
Oh, no, we don't.
we haven't.
Okay, I'll bring it straight to you, Sandina. And then, would anyone like to volunteer to be a microphone? Just aware that it gets in there.
So who are on my cameras?
Stephen and Ralph.
Stephen.
Oh, yeah. Or did you put your hand up? Or Dawson, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Dawson and Stephen.
So if the sin is our belief, and
Just hold it a bit closer to you, but
if the sin is our belief, beliefs and emotion and error, does that mean that this is where we get stuck, where we try to change the sinful action before feeling through the emotions of why?
that's right.
Or even identifying the sin. A lot of times we feel shame or embarrassment about, oh, I've done something, I can feel it's wrong. I just never want to do that again. But because of that shame or embarrassment, often or our fear of our own emotion, we don't want to examine what caused me to do that thing.
What belief or emotion do I have? And remember, all your beliefs are stored emotionally as well. So you're fundamentally looking at what beliefs that are stored as emotions have driven me to do this particular thing and keep driving me to do this particular thing.
So what if you have an idea of what that is?
Often you're not right.
It's just here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an idea.
This is a problem with your intellect. This is something else we need to talk about, right? Your intellect is terrible at working out your emotions. Terrible. And most people think that it's really good. So that makes it even worse. Your intellect is a part of your spirit body and it then transmits information to your physical body. Your emotions are stored in your soul. So if you become intellectually dominant, you're actually killing your soul in terms of killing it, not killing it in terms of reality. You can't actually kill the soul, but you're making it dead as to your emotions.
You're numbing it up.
You're numbing it out. Which is in the Paget message we refer to that as a dead soul. The person has become so shriveled in their emotional expression and so intellectual dominant that they can't even feel any more what they were feeling. Now, when I was 33 in this life, I got very close to that point where I'd work everything out intellectually, work out how to do a thing, work out what was wrong with it all in my mind, and then try to force myself to go ahead and do it, even though my emotions at times were often completely opposite. Like, as a Jehovah's Witness, we were asked to go and knock on people's doors, and at one point in my life I was doing it every day. And once I let myself feel my emotion, I felt like I hated it. I hated it because it felt so wrong to bother people and try to force them to listen to me. Right? It felt really wrong. I hated it in my feelings, but I didn't know I hated it until I started feeling. I just thought, the Bible tells me I've got to go out and preach, so that's what I've got to do. Go out and preach. Right? There was no other thought, there was no emotion in it for me really at all. I loved talking about God and things like that, but I disliked intensely, right from the time I started knocking on people's doors when I was 7 years old. And I can understand why so many people reacted badly to it. There was one time when I was 9, a guy came out with a shotgun and aimed it at myself and my dad, who were, knocking on the door, and said, you don't get off my property, I'm pulling the trigger. Like, you encountered these kind of things, and then you go and you sort of think, oh, they're really angry, what's wrong with them? And then when you look back and you go, I was imposing upon his will, and there was a guy, he didn't respond properly to it, obviously, but not in a loving way. Certainly, if he responded in a loving way, he just would have said, you're imposing upon my will. I don't want you here. You need to leave. That kind of thing. So if he'd done that, then it would really mean a lot more loving, but we'd probably not gone back and knocked on his door again. Because we were taught that unless someone got violent with you, you go back. What? Like, a no should be sufficient. Just say no and then you don't go back. That should be enough. But we were taught the opposite of that. So even at 7 or 8 years of age, I hated it. Emotionally. But I was so much in my mind by the time I was 7, and so much trying to get the approval of God by doing it, and all these other emotions, which are all sins, they caused me to discard my feelings about it. Once I connected my feelings about it, I couldn't do it without crying. Just couldn't do it. It got to the point where I just couldn't do it.
And just if we take that example, if you had realised, I don't like doing this, but I'm going to figure out with my mind why I don't, you could have come up with all kinds of things, couldn't you? Oh, I'm afraid, I was traumatised by that shotgun incident. It's, you wouldn't have ever connected to emotionally the feeling, I'm imposing on another person and that feels wrong.
Yeah.
So this is why your intellect is such a shoddy instrument in this, because it's always, a lot of your intellect is driven by your fears and your facade.
By your
and
emotions, actually.
the things you want to believe,
Yeah.
that you prefer to believe, rather than the actual truth of how you feel emotionally.
Yeah.
So the only way to really identify what your sin is, which is the cause driving the unloving effect, is to connect to it emotionally.
Yeah.
My issue with that is
Your
sometimes
issue.
I wonder.
I would like to
has
put
an
it in
issue.
the field. Well, here it is in writing.
Let's look at the
No,
issues.
My struggle with that, or like my concern, is like.
You're allowed to say you
You're allowed
have
to say
an
issue.
issue. You're allowed to. We're
We're
just teasing.
happy for you to say issue. Go ahead.
Sometimes
Because you're
I-
right, that most people have issues with
Yes.
feeling their feelings, right?
And it's better to be honest.
Yeah, better be honest than not.
Yeah, but also I feel like sometimes there's an excuse of like, instead of taking a loving action, I think I do this. Like, well, I just have to figure out the emotional reason why I don't do it, and then I stall with that, and then I don't end up doing the action.
I haven't finished my presentation yet.
We're definitely going to talk about
You do
that.
not have to figure out the emotional reason why to do it. Not if you involve God. You just have to figure out whether what you're doing is wrong or not. Right? So let's look at this, how it works. Everyone's understanding this so far? You see, a lot of times when we ask questions, we go, but there's a bit missing, and then that's because there is a bit missing, and we need to talk about the bit that's missing. So we're saying that the cause of a problem must be addressed, right? And the effect being the sinful behaviour, the sinful action, is the effect of the cause not being addressed. That's what we're fundamentally saying. So here we are, we've got our sin, which is really, as Mary's pointed out, is our sinful, shall we call it behaviour? Yeah. And that is driven by the sin, the real sin that exists inside of our soul now. It's not in our mind. Our mind can store sin in it, by the way, because you have sinful thoughts. Right? And they can be sinful behaviour. So this includes, the sinful behaviour includes the thoughts. So you know how a lot of people worry about their thoughts. They go, oh, I've thought about that thing, and oh, that was pretty bad. And people get pretty almost like scared or ashamed of their own thoughts sometimes. Why did I think of that for? You know? Well, that's a part of the sinful behaviour. That's the effect of something. So you've got your thoughts, you've got your actions, you've got your words. And these are things we taught in the first century. I said to people, it's not what comes out of your mouth that condemns you. Well, so I said what comes out of your mouth condemns you, but it's not what comes out of your mouth that is the real problem. It's what's in your heart that's the problem that drives what comes out of your mouth. Right? So that's saying there's a sin in your heart that drives your words. So when you want to yell and scream at somebody and put them down and make them feel, little and whatever you want to do, the words are sinful words, but in the end they're driven by some emotion, some belief in you that you're allowed to do that. Right? So what's in your heart, and quite often in the Bible the word soul was translated into heart, right? Rather than, because people didn't understand the fundamental design of the human, which is soul, spirit body, physical body, which is something I taught a lot in the first century, but people just dismissed that pretty much when they rewrote the Bible because they didn't believe in it. And so you end up with this understanding that, that everything's in your mind and all you've got to do is change your mind. But if you understand your soul, everything starts in it. Any behaviour you have starts in it. So if your sinful behaviour is acting, you're acting in a certain sinful manner, then it started in your soul somewhere. It started with your beliefs and emotions that are stored there. And unless that condition of your soul changes, so too will your behaviour remain. Right? So you could say the sin is a soul thing. It's in your soul. And the effect is what happens in your mind and in your actions. Right? So really what you think about is an effect of what's in your soul, not the other way around. Right? Now you'll read many Paget messages that make that very clear. That actually what is going on is the soul condition of the person needs to change, and frequently the soul and the mind are almost at opposites of each other. Sometimes your mind really wants to make a change, but your soul is so stubborn it does not want to move an inch on a change. Please, if you come down.
Something I've always wondered when reading Paget messages was, it seemed like sometimes Helen would say, don't feel this and don't feel that. Is that like, or just don't be so scared or get into a better state? What is really going on there?
You've got to bear in mind with the Paget messages that particularly when Ned was receiving individual messages for himself or from people he personally knew, that his interpretation of what they were trying to say was quite often very different than what they were trying to say. And the more personal acquaintance he had with the person, and the more addictions he had with the person, the more he was resistive to hearing the truth about it. You understand? There are many Paget messages that never even made it into the message book that you've got, actually, because he got rid of them because they were personal messages for him that he didn't agree with. You understand? So if they were there, then you could see what the spirits were trying to say. So there were sometimes we talked about, he was a smoker, and we talked to him about smoking not being a love of self. And we talked about him about why doesn't he love himself. But he got rid of all those messages because he wanted to keep smoking. Right? He wanted his addiction. So not everything you read, particularly when it comes to the personal messages that he got from his wife in particular, and also from some others like his grandma and his dad, and there was a few brothers and sisters that came to him who had died as well. A lot of those personal messages where they said, "Oh, don't feel that," or whatever, is not what their intention was for him to receive. Their intention was that he continued doing that and released that, but he didn't want to. So now that's going to taint his writings.
Okay, so that's confused me for a few years. I'm glad to...
Yeah. But we did actually tell him in a message about rapport. There was a message given by the Apostle John about spirit rapport and what a person can actually receive based upon their soul condition. And we talked to him a lot about changing the rapport between us, because a lot of what we were trying to say, he didn't get. So we did actually say that in the message. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we gave him a series of messages actually about that. Some of those messages are retained in the Paddock messages. You'll find, I think it's might be in the first or the second volume, I can't remember.
I think rapport, there's a series from John in the second.
In the second volume.
In the second.
Where we're trying to address the fact we can't share any more truth with you now because there's so many emotions you've got going on preventing us from sharing that truth. That makes sense? He went through also a very dark period where Helen had predicted that his daughter wouldn't die. She was ill, and she predicted that she wouldn't die, and she died.
Yeah,
And he went through a really dark period where he didn't want to talk to any of us, didn't want to hear any more from any spirits because his wife had predicted. But actually, she didn't predict that. Right? He wanted that to be true, and so that's what he wrote from her.
Actually, part of Paget's soul condition when his wife died was there was quite a bit of codependence between them.
Particularly on his part.
Partly what opened him up to doing mediumship is that he felt very lonely. I can't have my feelings. I need a sexy mummy. You know,
I need a woman who loves me and is sexually attracted to me, who mummies me as well, in order to feel good about myself.
Yes.
That's what Mary calls sexy mummy.
Yes, sorry. I mentioned he wanted his wife's feelings that she'd been giving to him throughout their marriage, which is reassurance, sort of a mothering kind of a feeling, what he called nurturing, you know. And so a lot of them, and that's partly why also he was blocked to some truth about me and other women. He didn't receive messages from very many women at all.
One of the messages he did receive from Mary, but he thought it was me.
Yeah. We felt similar too, I guess. Yeah. But also the truth about soulmates. You know, everyone had one but Jesus, and all these things that he didn't really, because he had certain ideas about women and men. And so the women that he received messages from were all famous women, and the men...
Mentioned usually in the Bible, or famous women who, you know, like the Queen of England or someone, you know, someone he could reference, you know.
But he had this idea that women really were there to nurture men.
And that's why with all of the messages that came from Luke, John, myself, and Matthew, Mark, even Cornelius, John Mark, all of the messages that were received from those people, he never asked them one thing about their soulmates. Their entire time, even though he knew about soulmates, he never asked any of them who their soulmate was. Does that make sense? Because he was already quite blocked to women in that regard. So a lot of the messages from women were tainted with his own belief systems. However, a lot of the messages he got from men were quite accurate as a result of his inclination towards listening to men. Makes sense?
There's actually one message, who's it from, the lady who comes and says, oh, I know you don't even want to talk to me anymore.
So there's an Egyptian
Yeah.
princess
Yeah.
that came to him to get help, and he helped her. And in the process of helping her, she loved the fact that he helped her, and she wanted to show his appreciation her appreciation to him. And so she came to talk to him a few times, but he was just not interested each time in hearing any more from her. So she just said, I know you're not that interested, but it's true. And then she tried to have a conversation. She did that for a couple of times, and then she gave up too. Yeah.
The overwhelming feeling he wanted from women was reassurance, and often he interpreted Helen's love for him as reassurance.
Yeah. So bear in mind that Paget himself hadn't changed some things in his soul. There was sin in his soul.
And then he also, there's often it says you're so close to the, what's the word, like so close
Celestial
to
heavens.
the heavens. Like,
Yeah.
was he that close?
No. He wanted to believe that because he was having these experiences that were emotional with God, and he wanted to believe that he was really, really close and really close to being finished. You know, we find that a lot when we're talking to people here on earth. Tell me I'm in the fifth sphere already. Tell me I'm in the third sphere already. And you say, oh, sorry, in the hell sphere. It's like, people get confronted about their true condition. They don't, and also as a spirit, you've got to remember, you're trying to communicate to a person on earth who's very, very sensitively aligned with emotions they don't really understand. And so you're trying to say to them the truth, but you also can feel that any time you say the truth to them, they really do not want to hear it, particularly about themselves, right? This is how many of you are when you come to one of our seminars, right? You get really confronted when we say something to you specifically about your condition, and you get, and imagine if it was a spirit coming to you, you'd go, I don't want to talk to you anymore, you know? And so somebody who you'd nurtured for years as a spirit to talk to them, and just because of one issue, and they have a meltdown, and they don't want to talk to you anymore. It's hard to get information from the spirit world to earth that is good information not based upon the addictions of the individual. You're sort of working with their sins to a degree, and against their sins if you're a celestial spirit, because the celestial spirit has no sin, and the person on earth you're dealing with has some. So you're working against that all the time. And you've got to bear that in mind with the messages. So they're not as completely accurate as what many people who read them wish to believe them to be. However, when it comes to the truths that we taught, which are these fundamental truths, they are very, very accurate. And we try to make sure of that. And the way we would do that is we would not talk about a spiritual principle that we felt was important unless we felt he was in a clear space to receive it, and we would be happy with the message at the end. And this is why sometimes in the Paget message we say, we're happy with how that turned out. Does that make sense?
And you also say you're not in a condition to receive this.
Yeah, many times we said that you're not in a condition to talk about this or receive this. Sometimes he wanted to continue, in his mind he wanted to continue because he thought it was good and he was enjoying the truths that were coming through, but he was not yet in the soul emotional condition where he could actually receive the message with accuracy. And so we'd have to delay it. And then other times when we wanted to come to him to give a message, he would say things like, you know, oh, I can do this, I can do this. He was saying to us, I can do this, I'm ready. And we say, you're not ready. You think you're ready, but you're not ready. Like you need to pray more. You need to have more alignment with our thoughts in order for us to transmit the thoughts we need to transmit through you in order to be written. So that you've got to bear that in mind when you're reading the messages.
Yeah. Also, within a person's condition, what creates rapport with anyone, but particularly with the spirit world, is the state of a person's will and their desire and their aspirations. So
Yes.
often when he was receiving messages like, oh, you're close to the heavens, or, you know, it's really just that he was more aspiring towards those places, so the rapport with the celestial spirits could be much stronger.
Oh, okay.
So he hadn't dealt with sin, but there was more aspiration there.
More faith too. He had a lot of faith,
Yeah.
which
Faith
which
and
helped
aspiration.
greatly. Yeah. Once he started to establish that faith, it helped him greatly to appreciate the what he was receiving, and that helped greatly with. As soon as he started getting faith that I was Jesus talking to him, rather than somebody else, because initially he thought I wasn't. Once he got that faith, then we could have a better rapport. Once he had the faith that John came to talk to him, John could have better rapport. Same goes with Luke. There were, you know, the primary people who delivered the actual deeper messages were myself, John and Luke, and sometimes Mark,
And sometimes
and
he's great.
and sometimes his grandma, because she had some alignment with him and him with her. But a lot of the other messages people couldn't get the rapport enough to talk with him to actually transmit the message. He did have rapport with some lawyers, because he was a lawyer himself, and some judges, and which was, you know, because obviously he's in that profession. And so they could say some truths which we couldn't say to him. And so it was about working with the individual sin of the individual in order to deliver truths which were without sin. And that's, it was a great, from our perspective, a great accomplishment, given the fact of where he was. And there's many spirits who came and said, we don't know why Jesus chose you, isn't that? If you read that in the messages. And I used to try to talk to our friends in the spirit world and say, well, I've got my reasons and I feel it's going to work. And I could also feel from God that, you know, God felt it was the best opportunity we had given the time period. And we tried many other, some of you may know of Swedenborg, he's mentioned in the messages. We tried doing it with him, but he misinterpreted a lot of things that happened in his spirit world travels, and as a result of that, it worked out to be almost like a failure. There were many things that were true that he did right, but when it came to myself, God, fundamental things about God's love, a lot of those things are not true, because he failed to see that I was not God. And so that it was a major failure to those messages. Yeah. Kevin? We don't want to get hung up though too much on that.
Yeah, I don't want to take you off but the spiritualist church and that whole thing around, was it just more accepted back then, generally, or?
I would classify the earlier, late 19th century and the early 20th century as a time of the maximum, that was the time of the most interest in the spirit world that had ever happened since my death in the first century. It was an interesting time looking at it from a spirit's perspective, because you could see all of these people now starting to openly investigate, even though they were religious, like many of them Christian. They were openly investigating the truth of there being a spirit world and people they could communicate to. It was actually what I would call the heyday of spiritualism in a way, which decayed after the 20s, after the war, after this First World War. It started decaying and it really got much worse in the 60s. Like it really, now what you perceive as spiritualism is a very, very poor shadow of it. Like it's just terrible. When we see people doing mediumship now, we go, well, that's just terrible mediumship, you know. It's fundamentally so poor that you can understand why many, many people don't believe in it anymore. Back then, there were some mediums who would get up in front of a group like this and they go, right, this is your dad, so Sarah, this is your dad, this is what he wants to say to you, blah, 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 give him some proof that it's the dad. Dad would be saying, oh, good message, and they'd get the name, the date of birth, all of these things, and then they go to the next person, you know, oh, this is your mum, and she wants to say blah, 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 you know, and be so direct and so informative, and also say things that only the person and the mother or the father knew, and it would be so clear and so much evidence that some of these mediums had audiences of like 5,000 people at a time doing this. This was in the late early 20th century, like up until around 1920, and there was all this information coming out, and that continued into the 30s to some degree. This is the time period also where there's another book you can download on our website called, sorry, no, not the Wanderer, the one where you got the doctor and his wife. Yeah, 30 years amongst the dead. They were in the early 20s to 30s, and they were really, even doctors were looking at mediumship. They were looking at mediumship because they started realising that the person is exhibiting no physical symptoms, and yet they're having extremely bad pain physically. What is going on? And so what they worked out, some of the doctors, was that, these are spiritual connections to the person. And once they worked out that, and they worked out how to do that, they had mediums doing, like, talking to the person. They'd electric shock the spirit out of the body of the person, and that spirit would jump into a medium, and then they'd be able to talk to the spirit through the medium and physically cure the person. Right? So these events were all happening like in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
And then after that, everyone became more and more mind dominant, everyone became more and more secular. The religions had a bit of a backlash to it all as well, the Christian religious faith in particular, because in the Christian religion it's taught that it's evil, you know.
Yeah.
And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it actually says at the pain of death it's evil.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Jews at our time, there were some that were stoned to death because of doing mediumship. So it was also a very dangerous profession. And then you had all the witch hunts of the 16th, right through the Dark Ages. You know, the people who were mediums, many of them were murdered, many of them were tortured to death.
That's the prior century, but yeah.
So there was a very strong backlash during the Dark Ages where it went really down in terms of mediumship. And then there was this little resurgence where people stopped torturing mediums. You know, they stopped putting them to death, and there was a resurgence then. And then it went up to around like the early 20th century where there were more mediums who were very accurate, very honest, very truthful, wouldn't mince their words, wouldn't try to pander to people's addictions. And by the way, they didn't get paid for it either, because that's a big manipulation. You know, when people start getting paid for it, they also start obviously manipulating messages a lot too. So, you know, there was that time that they weren't getting paid for it. It was really, really good. And then after the war, the First World War, things just started decaying again. By the time of the end of the Second World War, it was really looked down upon again. And by the time of the 60s and 70s, it was like, you know, atheism and now really science and atheism became very, very strong motivators to condemn people, and also religion. So you had atheism on one side condemning them, and you had all the religious faiths on the other side, the Muslim and the Christian faith in particular, condemning them as well. Right, so naturally most people were even frightened of doing it then. Yeah.
My grandfather in England was part of the spiritualist church, I learned.
Yeah.
But I also find here, like in my life, I don't think I've ever really found anybody who can, whatever you want to call it, channel or be a medium. And something that, let's say, I might trust, I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of people feel mistrustful of it. That's why I say these books are like the pinnacle of mediumship, really, at the end of the day, compared to what we now have available. During the same period of time, that's when Robert James Lee's channeled as well. That all happened during the same period of time. That was not with celestial spirits, but it was with spirits who were in good condition. And all of the history books, Through the Mist, up to the Gate of Heaven, the Lice Elysium and the Gate of Heaven, all of those books were channeled by spirits, not celestial spirits who knew all the truth, but spirits who were educated in terms of were higher than and up to the sixth sphere of the spirit world. So these were all books that occurred during that sort of heyday of spirit communication. After then, things decayed, and so now what we've got in the 2020s, shall we say, is it's so poor. I can understand why the majority of people don't trust it at all, because it is very bad mediumship on the whole.
I went to Lilydale, New York,
Yep.
and they have a spiritualist community there
Yep.
that still exists,
Yep.
which was fascinating to me. I'd never seen it. It was 20 years ago that I went there, but
Yep.
it's awesome.
No, there's plenty of spiritualist communities around now, but they're all into feeding the addictions of the individual.
Sure.
So that's where,
Not many people on earth, start from a situation of sincere ignorance on the matter.
no.
And sin has very much tainted the practice of mediumship, even in the 1920s.
Yeah.
There's a lot of selfishness in people, so they want to hear for themselves, and they're not sincerely inquiring about life in the spirit world. Most people on earth don't want to know. When we teach about what happens when you die, most people don't want to know that.
Most people are freaked out.
Sure.
Yeah. They think, oh no, that's terrible news.
Yeah.
And so lots of people don't actually inquire from spirits. They receive messages for people on earth, but there's very little consideration given to the condition of the spirit and the fact that the spirit's condition changes after they pass, that it can go through a process of growth or degradation even.
Yeah.
And so sin has corrupted, like everything else, had the practice of mediumship.
Yeah, so it's not going to improve until people understand how to deal with their sin. Tomorrow we'll be doing some mediumship. There's some spirits who want to come to you and talk to you about what they had to face in the spirit world because they didn't face their sin while they were on earth. And we'll probably have a chat with them tomorrow morning. But, and you'll see, the substance is a lot more, they've got things of substance to say, not just general things to you. And you'll get to see that. But yeah, generally the mediumship on earth now is quite bad. We've been to, because of Mary's and I are both very interested in mediumship, of course, because it's all about interacting with spirits who we were once, right? But we've been to many mediums now who are considered to be like good mediums, and we find them like, to be frank, very poor mediums. They barely are getting any truth at all from the spirits, at all. Usually, like last time we travelled, we were in England. We went to a mediumship session given by a man who Mary thought might be better than the average, and it was just so terribly bad because of this problem of sin and the addictions that were involved between him and the audience. It was just so terribly bad, and we came away feeling like, well, that was a waste of a day and a half of effort, because it was just so bad. But it was good to see how bad it was. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, good to see that. So yes, I would say you can't rely on much mediumship now at all. Can we not continue with that discussion?
Please.
Because I want
I'm
to
going to time out
this discussion.
because
Yeah.
you've got some important things to say.
We've got important things to discuss. Yep. All right, so anything about this, guys? Anything about this, what's been raised here? Yep. So we come down the front here. Just watch the... thank you.
I wanted to ask about the soul and sin. Because you said before that God created our souls and that we cannot actually transform them or destroy them.
When you say transform,
Like just said, transformation is not actually us that's transforming our soul.
no, I've never said that. I have said that as a human you cannot do it yourself,
Okay.
but you can remove your sin.
Right. Right.
Because that's not a transformation, that's a removal of blemishes you've added to your soul.
So we can sin, and that's affecting the operation of our soul,
Correct.
Very much.
Very much so.
but we can't actually,
You can remove your sin too without God,
okay,
and therefore affect the operation of your soul in a positive manner.
so that will affect our soul.
Correct. But what I'm suggesting is we want to involve God for lots of reasons, because the human can't transform their soul into a divine soul without God.
Okay, so that's what you were doing. So it's the divine love aspect. You're saying
Correct.
that. Okay, so that really transforms our souls, but also getting rid of the sin can change.
Well, no, getting rid of the sin doesn't transform the soul. So maybe we need to have a bit of a discussion about that. But don't. Mary's hiding things on the back here. Yeah, so I'll rub out this bit. Let's just talk about the mind a bit and the soul a bit. Your soul was created without sin, right? And remember, you're one half of the soul, not. There's two halves. So if we look at it from a, we've said all this before. So obviously, there's information on our website you're not seeking at. Let's have a look at the two halves of the soul. When you incarnate, which is the process of you becoming self-aware, one half of the soul connects to one type of body, and spirit body, and physical body, right? We've drawn this before, and this is the half of the soul. So one half, and the other half connects to, in the case of an attraction that's opposite gender, it'll be an opposite gender body. This happens accurately, by the way. You don't end up in the wrong body. It's physically impossible to end up in the wrong body for your soul. Right? God designed it that way. Just imagine if He didn't design it that way, it'd be a disaster. You'd end up feeling you're a male and you'd be in a female body. That would be so confusing, right? So God designed it this way, that it always happens that you end up in the right body for your half of the soul. Now, this soul is created in the perfect natural man is without sin, and that's the same place as it refers to in the Paget passages as the sixth ear. So when you incarnate onto earth, which is through the process of conception, as soon as you are conceived, you are basically now an individualized soul where you become an individual. You're aware, you start becoming aware of yourself in the womb from the time of conception onwards. By the time you're born, you've already completed a fair portion of that process, and then you start using your will after you're born, and that will helps you develop further in your soul. But when we are conceived, we are perfect from God's perspective, but we're a perfect human, not anything else. We're perfect human. We are in the condition of the sixth sphere when we are conceived. By the time we're born, we're generally already degraded a bit because our parents have degradations. So our parents have addictions, they have sin, and those sins, those beliefs, those emotions all start getting imposed on the little child who is conceived. And the child starts, because it's developing in the womb of its mother, it starts absorbing, in particular, the injuries of its mother and father. Does that make sense? And it also goes back to generations before, if you think about it in an obfuscated manner, because in the prior generation, the mother had some of the prior generation's injuries. And the prior generation, the mother and the father had some of the prior generation's injuries in them. And so you can see by substitution, you can see that even the grandfather's injuries could be in the child, or the great-grandfather's injuries could be in the child. You understand? Because mum and dad haven't dealt with their injuries. They haven't dealt with their sin, their emotions in particular. And the way the soul starts experiencing its life is firstly through its emotions, through its soul. It doesn't have a developed brain. When it's just a conceived cell, which is right at the beginning of conception, there is no brain. There's no brain in the physical body or in the spirit one. There's no brain. And so the brain starts developing as a part of the multiplication and replication of cells. That happens in two areas, in the spirit body as well as the physical one. So both the physical and the spirit body are created by sex between the parents. They're not God's creations, they're, well, you say they're, the subsequent result of God's creation, which is the sexual act, but they're fundamentally created by the parents. So whatever injuries the parents have now start getting imposed upon the sixth-sphere soul, the perfect soul. It starts degrading, because most people on earth are in the first sphere in terms of their condition. And in fact, the majority are in the hells, not just the first sphere. The top of the first sphere is quite lovely, actually. But most people are not in the top of the first sphere. They're in the hells of the spirit world, in terms of their condition. So now, this little child who's just been conceived starts absorbing its environment. A part of the absorption happens firstly emotionally, because it doesn't have a developed brain to avoid the absorption emotionally. The only way you can stop yourself from absorbing something is when you've got a developed will to stop yourself from absorbing it. And the child can't do that, right? Because it hasn't learnt how to use its will yet. So it's going to automatically absorb. And this is one reason why, as parents, you should consider getting rid of your sin, because it's going to absorb some of your sin, right? So it absorbs some of your sin. So the sinful behaviour, the thoughts and feelings of thoughts and actions of the parent is not what's getting absorbed. It's the actual sin that exists in them as beliefs and emotions that's getting absorbed. Right? And that starts from the time of conception, and it continues. If you had a perfect parent without sin, that wouldn't happen. So this is a human-caused condition where the degradation begins occurring. It's not a God-caused condition, it's a human-caused condition. Make sense?
So you're teaching us right now how we can actually remove this.
Correct. This is why we want to have today's discussion, so we understand how to remove sin. There's a slow way and there's a fast way. And I want to teach you the fast way. Why would I bother with the slow way? Like, if you want to know the slow way, we can talk about that, but it seems to me to be slow, therefore a waste of your time. It's better to do the fast way, right? And what is possible is that people on earth can reach perfection on earth. Particularly with God's help, it's definitely possible. You can reach perfection on earth with God's help, on earth. You could even reach it before you had children. Because you see the major advantage of that. It would be the next generation wouldn't have to deal with sin. They'd only have to deal with their own sin, not anybody else's. Right?
That's what you mean about the
Closer with the mic.
it's how you were saying that the sins of the forefathers are visited upon the child.
Each generation.
So it keeps going.
Yeah, there's a message in the Paget messages from Luke about that. Yeah, the way in which the sins are passed down from generation to generation. And this is the way, through the emotional condition, the belief systems of the forefathers get passed down. And you can see, in some ways, all of you have retained beliefs even from your great-granddad, great-great-granddad. You know, most people don't realise it very much because they hardly even know their great-great-granddad, but when you talk to your great-granddad in the spirit world, you'll be probably at some point, you'll realise, oh, that's where that belief came from. You know, that's where that feeling came from. Yeah. So this problem with the degradation of the soul occurs to every single person on earth now, because there's nobody on earth who is without sin. So naturally the degradation occurs, but it's not a God-caused problem. It's a human-caused problem. Right? God doesn't want us to have it, but God knew through the exercise of our will that we'd likely do it. So then God created laws that allowed you to get rid of it. Get rid of the sin. Even though it's human caused, God foreknew that there would be sin, and God also then created laws to allow the human to get rid of their sin. No?
Thank you. Really great intro. This question that I have is, this is all generational trauma that we're talking about.
Sorry?
Generational trauma,
Not-
basically.
No,
Oh, no?
not
Okay.
just,
Okay,
not just.
okay, thank you.
Can I define?
You, absolutely.
Yeah. It's not just generational trauma. What you guys believe is trauma, many of you have no idea of the real trauma yet. A lot of the real trauma comes from your belief systems, that many of you have well-established beliefs that you believe to be true and you're not traumatized by at all.
Right.
But actually from God's perspective, it's the main reason for your traumatized life. You understand? Now, there are times when we also get generational trauma where parents have traumatized their children, of course, which makes their life even worse than that. Right? But the majority of the problems that we face on earth, and the average child on earth does not experience huge amounts of torture from their parents. Right? In fact, they receive quite often huge amounts of consideration from their parents. Right? Where the parent will even sacrifice themselves for the sake of the child. Right? Not understanding that that action on the part of the parent is a sin. Because from God's perspective, every child should see itself as an equal to its parent rather than superior to it. Right? So a lot of the trauma that you're going to have to face is not the trauma you think you're going to face. It's going to be the trauma where you don't imagine you have any trauma, but are still sins. They're still disharmonies with love. They're the trickiest things to get rid of because you believe them to be righteous
Yes,
when they're not. Make sense?
it does.
Yeah.
Then the question really lies in, if we were as parents able to fix our sins or correct our sins or heal them,
Yep.
and then not impart them on our children,
Yep.
would be ideal.
Would be ideal.
If, what my question really is if I heal my sins now, does that also help heal the child, the sins that I've imparted on my children?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No. I know it's a common thought, but the answer is no.
It is a common thought, that's why I wanted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, the reason why is it's in them now.
Yeah,
And it's theirs now.
it's theirs now to own.
The only way you can not visit your sins as a parent upon the child is for you to be sinless when you had the child.
Okay,
You understand?
brilliant, thank you, sir.
Yep. Beyond that, if you reduce your sin, you are creating an allowance in your child to deal with theirs. So what we see a lot happening between parents and children is the parent does not deal with their sin and the child starts to deal with theirs. What often then happens is the parent becomes pushy on the child to stop doing that because the child is doing something disharmonious with the parent's sin. And the parent's sin wants to fight for itself inside the parent. And so the parent becomes bitter, angry, pushy, trying to be demanding upon the child, trying to get the child to stop making the changes the child is making. Now, of course, if the parent was sinless, even after the child was born, not before, but way after, if the parent was sinless, they wouldn't do that. And that would be very helpful for the child to not have all that opposition on top of their own sin, to have all their parents' sin to deal with while they're trying to deal with their own. That would be helpful, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Yeah. But you can't remove the child's sin for them. That's going to be something they're going to have to do for themselves.
I mean, as a parent, I have done so. And now that I am removing mine, I see the damage that I've done to my children.
Correct.
And it's really hard to witness that struggle that I now see within them.
Well, what happens then is a lot of parents enter a stage of guilt, which they then impose upon their children, which is another sin.
I am working through that as well, yes.
So in other words, they try to get their child to change because they've made changes.
I am.
And that can be very, very damaging to your child.
I am preventing myself from doing that with
Well,
more sin within myself. Yes.
You're using your mind to try to stop you from doing it. That is a better way of saying it.
Yeah,
Which is not preventing you from doing it.
now.
Not at this stage.
No, the emotion is still being presented.
Yeah, you need to deal with your guilt.
Yes.
You need to deal with your guilt. The way to deal with that is, again, what we're going to describe.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and how to remove a sin. Guilt is a sin. It's in disharmony with your true, perfect state.
And
Makes
really,
sense?
guilt is a thing that comes before repentance.
Yes.
So, if
Well,
we...
it depends what kind of guilt, doesn't it? But maybe Mary can explain.
Yeah, I mean, if you recognise that you have harmed your kids, because you realise, oh, I've been harmed, I'm dealing with that, and then you realise, wow, now I can see it in my son or my daughter, or how I avoided that, how that's affected them, then often we feel guilty. But that feeling is really, and then we call that us being sorry. And then we're like, oh, I'm so sorry, son, I'm so sorry, you do, oh, this is all because
Change
of
your
me.
behaviour now because I'm so sorry.
Yes, and the more you're in that struggle, the more I feel guilt, and I call that sorry. But actually, it's not truly sorry. The real repentance process releases your son or daughter from your guilt, from your insistence that they change, and that's actually the free space for them to change. That's what creates the openness for them to change. Anything before then, either you fight them, recognising the sin you've put in them, or you're guilty about the sin you've put in them. Both of those things are actually quite oppressive to the child.
They're also your addictions,
Yes.
which are further sins.
Which is why they're oppressive, because all addictions are oppressive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the repentance process for what you've done, so you truly being sorry for what you've done to your child and releasing the cause properly, emotionally, is the only time when your child you actually withdraw from the pressure on the child, which is actually the most loving thing to do. But often most parents think, no, I've done this thing, now I've got to sort it out for them or with them, and that's actually still not respecting this gift of free will.
Correct. Yes.
That
In
was
the child.
gifted to you and the child and your
And
parents
by the way,
and
it's
generations.
not your child.
Yeah. God's child who
God's
you had a part in raising.
who you created some bodies for.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this gift of will and understanding that your child,
Yeah.
needs to come to understand that the sin within them now is only going to leave through the operation of their will, not dad's or mum's. Or that's a very important lesson that God wants every single one of us to know.
Yeah. We become, in that way, responsible for our own sin.
Thank you.
Which is right.
We should be. Are we continuing this digression?
You guys are slippery. Everyone wants to slip around.
Can I get questions back on the subject? Thank you. Mandy, you have one? Thank you.
Just about where receiving God's love falls into this, will you be talking
That's what I want to talk
That's
about.
the next thing.
Yeah, that's right, the important subject, yeah. That's what I want to talk about. Is there any other questions besides that? Because we are going ahead and answering that. Sai, you want to ask? Just behind you, man.
So the thoughts that you wrote on the report, and you mentioned that you sometimes worry about having a thought instead of dealing with the cause.
Yep.
I have plenty of examples, and some are very terrible. But sometimes I have this thought. I know that it is a bad thought,
Yeah.
but I don't have a feeling that it is bad. So I know it based on some kind of frame of reference that it is bad.
That's right. It's interesting what happens in your mind, because you can on one hand have a thought that you think is bad, while at the same time have no feeling that it's bad. Now, if you have a thought that you have a bad thought, and then on top of that you have a feeling that the bad thought is bad, you're still nowhere near dealing with the feeling.
Yes.
You understand? And this is why people got so caught up in the idea that they can force their behaviour and force their thoughts out. In fact, what happened and what's been introduced in society many, many times in history is this whole kind of idea of controlling your mind. Right? Now, from a religious perspective, many started doing that by hitting themselves with, like every time they had a bad thought, they would punish themselves before God could punish them. Was the general, not understanding that's also a sin to do such a thing, because you're harming your own body, that's a sin. So they'd do that, and then other people would go, like, I need to put myself in some kind of restriction now because I've got these bad thoughts, and I feel like doing this, but I have these bad thoughts about doing it, but I know that the bad thought is wrong, you know, your conscience, which is not yours either. The conscience is God's communication with you of truth that allows you to know that something is wrong even though you think it's right, right? And that occurs as a part of God's help of every individual on earth. Every individual has that operation. Now, we have put in on our website lots of discussion about the conscience and how it works and what goes on with the conscience and everything. So that's a separate discussion in itself. But it's important to understand that God's constantly trying to share truth via your soul with you regarding your condition. It's because he wants you to be happier than you are. That's the reason why he does it. He's like a good parent, always trying to get you to be happier.
So how in that place where you have a bad thought about another thought but no feeling associated with it, how in that place would you try to access that feeling?
Well, there's got to be feelings associated with it, because all your thoughts come from your feelings at some point. Now, your feeling might be, I'm open to other people influencing me, and it might be a spirit dropping the thought into your mind. But that would be because that would be the effect of you being too open to other people's thoughts influencing you. It could also be because you have emotions that cause these thoughts, in the sense that you have an emotion where, let's say the bad thought is, I really want to have sex with my partner, and if she resists me having sex with her, then I'm willing to take it one step further and manipulate her a bit into having sex with me by making her feel bad or good, or buying her a rose, or whatever it is, the manipulation that works. Do you know what I mean? That, from God's perspective, that would be a wrong thing to do. If my motive for giving Mary a gift is that so she has sex with me, then that is a bad motive. But that thought to do that comes from some feelings. So what are the feelings? Well, there could be all sorts of feelings. Could be that I feel like I need to have sex with my girl in order to feel good about myself. Or it could be that I just want to respond to my own sexual urges and I want her to as well. And without considering that she has her own will and she doesn't have to. You know, it could be things like that. But whatever it is, that thought came from something that went on feeling-wise.
But you can't analyze that, right? Because part of teaching is to, feel your raw emotions, but there isn't any.
The problem is, you're having the thought and then you're saying, I should feel bad about that.
Not only that, you're also saying, I don't have any emotions. When you do,
well,
you're just not connected to them.
That's why, because you think, I've got to feel bad about it. But you don't. You're better to feel what you actually feel about it. And you're preventing yourself having that connection by saying, I should feel bad. Oh, I don't feel bad. Oh, I don't want to know what I feel.
Like an example of that size is that many men are angry, but they never act upon it. They think, they never act upon it. But actually, internally, they are quite angry, and they're angry because of different things not being met, and they're not looking at any of it. And instead, what they try to do is they go, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. You know, I have never treated a woman badly, even though there's a lot of rage coming out of them towards women. And they say to themselves, I've never treated a woman badly, and yet the emotion coming out is the sin, right? But they're telling themselves in the mind, I don't have that. I'm not like that. I'm different to my dad. I'm different to my mum. I'm different to these other angry men, you know? And it requires a lot more honesty with self than that if you want to have any acknowledgement of your own sin. Yeah. But let's get to the topic, shall we? Which I'm trying to get to. Yeah. All right, so we're saying here quite clearly to you, aren't we, that the sin is mostly the beliefs and the emotions that support those beliefs. And we're also saying to you that it's very hard to get rid of them without some help. Now, when you arrive in the spirit world, there will be spirits assigned to help you. Just like while you're on earth, you've got a guide and a guardian trying to help you while you're on earth. You will also have, often it's the same guide and guardian that's assigned to help you when you arrive in the spirit world as well. And they're going to try to help you do one of two things. If they are a spirit who has progressed using their mind only, then they will help you use your mind to overcome your sin. And that can be done. The way it's done is the mind has to identify the sin, then you've got to go through an emotion relating to the sin, and if you go through the emotion often enough and well enough and completely enough, then eventually the sin leaves you. Now that is the progression back to the perfect natural man. That's what it is. They help you identify the sin, and they help you also see that there's emotion attached to the sin, and then you go through this emotion. This is not spirits, by the way, on the Divine Love Path. This is not celestial spirits doing this. This is every person who ever passes generally is exposed to this kind of teaching, where they're taught the natural love way. The natural love way being, you've got to try and identify your sin, and you've got to use your mind to identify your sin, and once you've identified your sin, you've got to find the emotion that's inside of you that causes that sin, and then once you find the emotion, it's already sounding quite hard, right? Once you find the emotion that causes the sin, and then you choose to feel that emotion, you've got to feel it regularly enough and often enough and completely enough to the point where the emotion no longer exists, and once the emotion no longer exists, the sin is gone. That's the natural love way. Make sense? Yep. It requires dealing with the emotion, because if you don't, most of these spirits, pretty much all of them, particularly in the higher spheres, like I'm talking about the 4th, 5th and 6th spheres in the spirit world, they have all been educated to know that if you don't feel some of the emotion, you're not going to be able to avoid it. So they know you're going to have to feel some emotion, but that's not the focus. The focus is using your mind to identify the sin, and the focus is then using your mind to access the emotion, to feel the sin. And this takes a long time. And so many spirits find themselves like years. The shortest I've ever heard anybody arriving in the 6th sphere after being in the hells of when they arrived was around 45 years. It was one lady I remember talking to, and she had little sin to deal with because of her life on earth was quite morally pure, you could say.
So did she start in the hells? Or
She started in the hells, but she had little sin to deal with. So she wasn't in the depth of hell. She was but she arrived in this 1st sphere, which is where the hells are, in a higher place than the average person would. But she had some things to deal with, but it took her 45 years using her intellect to deal with them, and she arrived in the 6th sphere. That's about the shortest I've ever seen anybody do it, 45 years. If she had had God's love, she wouldn't have been, when I met her, she was in the 6th sphere still after hundreds of years. So she wouldn't have been there if she had received God's love. She would have been a celestial spirit. But she was still in the 6th sphere, still thinking that she'd completed the process of sin, even though she had not looked at her sins regarding God. So she hadn't looked at those. She's only looked at what was to do with humans. You can be perfect in the 6th sphere and still have sins relating to God. So God doesn't expect you as his children to recognize him as your God. He doesn't expect you to recognize him as your Father. You can be a perfect person without believing in God at all. But it requires dealing with your sin every time. You must deal with your sin. And if you don't recognize God in dealing with your sin, then this is the thing you're going to have to do at some point. You're going to have to deal with your sin in a very practical, intellectual manner, identifying each sin. And bear in mind, most people have thousands of them. You have to identify every one of them and then feel the emotion that created it. And that's going to take some time.
And keeping in mind what we said earlier, that your mind is very resistive to this whole process in terms of truth.
Because your mind is driven by the emotion in your soul that is already sinful. So it's tricky. And you're going to need a lot of help from someone else to do it. You're going to need a lot of help from someone saying, actually, I know you don't think it at the moment, but this is a sin. And eventually you'll come to terms where you go, you'll trust them after a while, you know. You go, oh yeah, I dealt with that sin, and look, my place is better now, so that means they were right. And so you start trusting them, and their help will bring you to the place where you end up sinless again. Sinless as you were born, conceived to be. So that's the process. Hillary, you want to? That's one process, I should say.
Just very quickly, if that woman had been focused more on her emotions and less in the mind, how rapidly have you seen that process
She
happen?
focused on her emotions almost totally. That's why she progressed as fast as she did.
Afterwards, you said.
No.
Oh, I thought you said.
It's very
Without
rapid.
God.
To go from the hells to the sixth sphere in 45
So
years
45
is
years
like
is
lightning
rapid.
speed. Yeah, very.
Okay, I must have been
That's
misinterpreted.
Yes.
Okay, I thought
And-
you
and-
said she was using her mind though.
She used her mind to identify her emotions, and then she was very willing to process
And
her
then she
emotions.
was willing. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
That's right.
great. But
And
it's-
the average person isn't. They're very unwilling to feel their emotions, and so they take a lot longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But she was very, very willing to feel her emotions. Once she identified with her mind, there was no concept of God in her at this stage. She was brought up an atheist. No concept of God. Once she realised her emotions were important, she embraced that as a teaching, a belief. And so once she embraced that as a teaching and belief, it was so easy for her. All she needed was someone to tell her what a sin was. And then she learnt to go straight to her emotions about it every single time. And that's how she got there in 45 years. Does that make sense? Because she went straight to her emotions every single time. Now, she would have loved the Divine Love Path if she had heard of it, right? But she hadn't heard of it. Nobody around her knew about it. All of her friends didn't know about it. So she never learned it. That's why it could have been a few years, probably less than a couple of years for her, because she was so willing to deal with emotions. Of course, obviously not willing to deal with emotions pertaining to God. So when we met her, that was the issue we had to discuss. As soon as she started to realise those emotions, she progressed very rapidly. She's now a celestial spirit, but she progressed very rapidly after that towards being a celestial spirit. But she'd been in the sixth sphere for a number of years, like 200 and so years, before she was prepared to even face the concept of God. Make sense? Yeah. Many of our sixth sphere friends are like that. They have so many blockages about their emotions about God. Christians, atheists, Muslims, Hindus, all sorts of religious faiths, and yet they've got so many blockages with their emotions with God that they've done the natural love way, which is the way we've just described, as a way of progress into the sixth sphere. They consider themselves to be at the pinnacle of human happiness, which they are. But there's a divine happiness above it, which you can't experience without God. Make sense? Okay, what's our time?
Yeah, it's
Because I've raved on a lot already. It's 1:45. They haven't even covered the thing. but so let's summarise before lunch. So let's go for lunch pretty soon. But let's just summarise. The sin is contained within the beliefs and emotional state your soul is in. Your thoughts, your behaviour, your actions, your words, all the things that people measure as an expression of you, they are potentially sinful behaviour, but they're not the sins. They're what causes the sins. Everyone understand that? This causes the sinful behaviour. So did I say that wrong?
Yes, you
Yes,
did.
I did. This is the effect of your sins. This is the cause of your sins. Yes?
Yes.
And so it's very important to understand, can you see, if I can remove these, the causes, then these will naturally disappear. Can you see that? They will be relieved. But I want to say something else about this, and that is, the effects of what you've done will remain. So you understand what I mean by that? If you rub out your sins, your beliefs and emotions that cause your sin, all of your sinful behaviour, what you did will remain. The things you did in the past, you won't do them in the future anymore because you've rubbed out the reason why you did them. But the fact that you did them in the past means whatever you did in the past is going to remain. And there's only two ways to get rid of that. One is by you taking some action, what's called reparation, to get rid of it, and trusting in God and praying to God about helping those people, the people you have affected, to get rid of it themselves. That you will not be able to change the past things you did. You can only change your future. What you can do is remove the emotional reasons why you did what you did in the past and remove your guilt about what you did in the past. But in your record of your own life, you will remember, but not emotionally remember. You'll intellectually remember you did those things. There's a huge difference between emotionally remembering and intellectually remembering. Emotionally remembering, there's a lot of pain and suffering in that. Once you get rid of the old emotions and you feel them, then you're left with the intellectual imprint of what you've done. And there's no pain in that. Does that make sense? Now, there are Paget messages that describe this very clearly. And Mary and I have also done some presentations at home in Australia to groups of people where we've explained the details of this. So I must say to you this thing. These beliefs and emotions aren't the only thing that needs to be dealt with. Because substantially they, and we've called them this in the messages, are memories. Does that make sense to you? What you now believe and what your emotions are right now are the memories of your soul. So if I take you 1 second further in time, you'll have an extra 1 second of memories, won't you? If I take you a day further in time, you'll have an extra day of memories, right? Those memories that are tainted by your sin are painful because they have emotions and beliefs attached to them that are painful. The memories that are not attached to sin are pleasurable. Even if they're an intellectual memory of bad past behaviour, you'll remember them as a part of your experience without it being painful, as long as you get rid of the beliefs and emotions that cause them. Or you could say, as long as you get rid of your bad memories. And when I say bad, I mean the ones that cause you to feel pain. So the purpose of God's love is to remove from you the memories that cause you pain. And they're not your intellectual memories, they are your emotional memories that cause you pain. So when you read in the Paget messages where it says that God's love deals with your memories, your sinful memories, you now understand, well, that involves your beliefs and your emotions, the things that have caused you to remember at the soul level rather than at your intellectual level. So when I'm driven to say something like anger, that's sinful behaviour. The anger is caused probably by some sadness, right? Where that is painful, some memories that are painful inside of me that are part of my sin. So it could be that I expect you to make me happy, and when you don't, I get angry with you. So that would be a sinful belief that you're responsible for my bad feelings. That sinful belief is a memory. I have an imprint of that in my soul as a memory. So every single time somebody does something that makes me feel bad about things or bad about myself, I'll get angry because of that memory imprint. Make sense? In my soul. It's an emotional state in my soul, not an intellectual state. But it's a memory. And that memory, once engaged, it will drive my behaviour. Every single time. My thoughts, my actions, my words, everything is driven by that memory. If I can remove the memory, in other words, remove the emotion and belief that you're responsible for my pain, if I can remove that as a belief and as an emotion, can you see I'll no longer feel angry when you don't remove my pain? I'll no longer be angry with you thinking that you're to blame for my pain. Does that make sense? That's just an example of how the release of these memories affects you in your future emotionally. So what we want to focus on after lunch is how do we deal with these beliefs and emotions, which are our memories, how do we deal with them on a practical level in order to release them so that we're no longer governed by their demands? Because your memories at the moment are demanding you respond in a certain manner. And how do I get rid of those demands? Well, I get rid of them by getting rid of the memories. The emotional memories of these imprints of why this behaviour that I engage is acceptable to me right now when it's not acceptable to God. So substantially, we're going to be talking about how to release from myself, the fastest possible way to release from myself my memories, which are my beliefs and emotions that have been established in me from the time I was conceived onwards. How do I get rid of them the fastest possible way? That's really the substance of what needs to happen in the discussion, isn't it? You see that? Because if I can use this slow way that we've just described, that's laborious. Or I can use a fast way. That's going to be better. So my suggestion is embrace the fast way, but of course to embrace it you've got to know what it is. Right? So we need to discuss that in detail. Yep. Can we leave the discussion there so we can have some lunch? What's the time now?
Yeah, it's 5 to 1.
5 to 1. So can we come back at 1:30? Thanks, guys.